Chapter 39. The Prisoner. The sun had been in the sky for less than an hour when Reyes and Gaggara, with bows in hand, joined the rest of their hunting party. Cagleen, Wallag and Lagnoff were waiting as per usual round by the fire pits. They had each grabbed a small morsel of something off of one of the spits, and they were chatting amicably with Agnart while they waited. "Ah," Agnart commented as Reyes and Gaggara finally arrived. "Here they are." Lagnoff looked up towards the sun and smiled. "Mind you, if I had a male to myself, I'd probably be a little late up in the mornings as well." "They are cute together," Wallag offered. Hunting parties tended to prefer an early start in the mornings. It was always better to fly low over the tops of the trees and catch prey while it was still asleep in its bed. It was also better to raid farms during the early hours of the morning, although farmers also had a tendency to get up very early. "Well, congratulations, Tanrag," Agnart told Reyes, changing the subject. "I heard the news. You are now personal interpreter to our beloved Dragon Man. You have my sympathy." "Thank you," Reyes said uncertainly. "I guess you two have been celebrating all night," Cagleen commented with a smirk. Due to their grey skin, it was hard to see a harpy blush, but Reyes could feel the blood tingling in his cheeks nevertheless. Besides, it wasn't true. He and Gaggara were still together, but she hadn't wanted anything much to do with him last night. Indeed, she had hardly said a word to him all morning. "Yeah," Lagnoff grumbled. "I heard they wanted to make her a Drake man, but our beloved leader put a stop to it." Reyes looked at Lagnoff, wondering how she had heard that. Harpy hearing was good, but there had been so much noise in the compound yesterday that it had been hard to overhear anything. "And what about you?" Agnart turned her attention towards Gaggara. She stepped forward and placed her hands gently on either side of Gaggara's frame. Gaggara grunted incoherently. It was clear she wasn't happy about something, and swiped Agnart's hands away the instant she put them there. "I'm sorry," Agnart apologised, sounding a little hurt. She took a step back. "I must apologise for her attitude," Reyes declared. She had wanted to get to the arena yesterday. Her favourite champion was fighting her 20th bout. "I can speak for myself," Gaggara attacked. Reyes almost felt as if he'd been bitten. He took a step away from Gaggara and then moved back to her. Although he wanted to embrace her and find out what he might have done to upset her, he hesitated to even touch her. "Oh," Cagleen commented, answering Reyes. "You mean Skeeg the Ogre. Yes, I love to watch Skeeg too, and I also missed that bout. The Inquisitors stayed here for far too long yesterday. Still, maybe Skeeg will decide to stay and fight in the arena some more. Maybe there'll be more opportunities to see her fight in the future." "Did she win her bout then?" Reyes asked. "Of course she won her bout, Reyes," Gaggara commented, emphasising his name in disgust. It was the first time he could remember that she had ever referred to him as anything other than handsome. "She's Skeeg. She couldn't have lost." "Reyes," Lagnoff repeated. She was looking directly at Reyes as she spoke. "Who is this Reyes?" "I am," Reyes admitted. He looked at the other harpies gathered nearby him worriedly. It would only take one of them to recognise the name for him to be in deep water. "It's the name I was given by the human family that, brought me up. I adopted the name Tanrag when I entered the city. And when you were asked your name yesterday, you gave it as Reyes, because you weren't sure Tanrag would be accepted by the life spell the mage cast on you, despite the fact it's the name you'd adopted," Agnart suggested. Reyes nodded. "I'm afraid so." "You know, the name Reyes is familiar to me for some reason," Agnart commented with a shrug. "I can't think why, but I'm sure I've heard it somewhere before. Well, no matter. Anyway, it's easy to guess why you'd want to drop it." "Agreed," Lagnoff offered. "No one wants to be lumbered with a name that was dumped on them by humans." "I don't think anyone, especially not your own females, would hold it against you for wanting to change it," Agnart finished. Gaggara looked around at Reyes, her eyes lowered apologetically. Agnart then approached Gaggara again and knelt down in front of her. "And you, my dear, you need to forget such foolishness such as missing your favourite fight to slaughter her latest opponent. There'll be more fights for you to watch, more champions for you to cheer for. Skeeg isn't the first, and she won't be the last." Gaggara nodded and said, "I guess I was just feeling betrayed. I mean, Skeeg gets to fight about once every 4 or 5 months, and that's the day the Inquisitors choose to come and visit. I wouldn't mind so much if it hadn't been her 20th bout. I guess I was a little upset that Handsome never confided me with her real name." Reyes smiled inwardly to himself. She was calling him Handsome again. Well, Agnart told her, you definitely need to let it go. Tanrag dropped the name Race because it had been foisted on her by humans. I'm sure any of us would have done the same thing under the same circumstances. Race could see Lagnov nodding her head gently out of the corner of his eye. I guess so, Gaggara admitted. She spoke with her head bowed as if she was ashamed of herself. Besides, Agnart commented, too much negativity isn't good for you in your current condition. Current condition? Gaggara, Race and Lagnov echoed together. You didn't know? Agnart climbed back to her feet. Well, it's always possible that I'm wrong, but I would say that Gaggara here is with child. Well, it's about time, Lagnov commented. Race and Gaggara embraced each other. Why didn't you tell me? Race asked. I didn't know, Gaggara replied, her face lit up by joy. I could be wrong, Agnart reiterated. At most she's been pregnant for maybe a week, and it's very difficult to be certain after so short a time. It could just be that she suddenly put on a little extra weight in the wrong places. I've had some minor experience with pregnancy in the past, though, and have gotten to learn most of the signs. A child born to a pair of underage harpies, Wallag muttered unhappily. Did you know I'm in my early 20s, and I've never yet been a mother? Baby or no baby, Caglin commented, ignoring Wallag. I'm sure she's not about to give birth right this minute, and we do have a job to do. Right, yes, Race said, breaking reluctantly from the embrace. Gaggara tried to follow Race as he stepped away, and then she looked him in the eyes, her own expression demure, and maybe even a little shy. Then she licked her lips in a manner that Race found quite erotic. Agnart broke the mood. Tanrag, Race, she coughed. Now that you've been promoted to the rank of chargeman, you don't need to go hunting with the rest of your group. You can stay here if you wish. Now, I won't be able to do anything about it today, not at such short notice, but starting tomorrow I can arrange to replace you with a different huntress. I believe there are currently 6 in Lofgren's group. Race thought about it for only a couple of seconds, and then said, I appreciate the thought. Normally I would say no, as I don't like to let Gaggara out of my sight. But, Agnart commented, I do have a small errand to run, Race replied. It might be nice if I do that while Gaggara and the others are off hunting today. Then we could spend the rest of the day together. We could do this errand together. Once we get back, Gaggara suggested. I love you, Race told her. The thing is, I really should do this thing today, and considering how far we've been having to fly to find anything worth the hunt lately, we're likely to be quite tired by the time we get back. Besides, Race thought to himself, this really is something that I need to do alone. Gaggara looked as if she was going to protest further, but Agnart spoke instead. There was no shame in her words, no attempt to keep her minging to just herself and Race. She spoke in words that all there could hear quite plainly. You know that if Gaggara is actually pregnant, she isn't going to want to be touched by you, at least not intimately, not until she's actually had the child. You've done your job, the girl is pregnant, and it's time you moved on to someone else. Once you've run this errand of yours, why not come back to me here? We can keep each other company while Gaggara and the others are hunting. Gaggara actually seemed to approve. That sounds like a good idea. No, Race replied. He put an arm around her. It isn't. I told you, I love you, and I won't betray you with another. What if I promise not to bite? Agnart offered. No, Race insisted. Very well, Agnart said. She didn't sound too happy. She turned her attention to the hunt leader. Caglin, the hunt is yours, as per usual. You will be 1 huntress down for the day. I'm sure you'll manage. I understand, Caglin said. Will Tanrag be rejoining us for future hunts? You'll have to ask her, Agnart commented. She glanced quickly round at Race, and then looked back towards Caglin. If she is, then I'll probably move you to another group. You're far too valuable as a hunt leader to be just another huntress, and now that Tanrag outranks you, it could be awkward keeping you as leader. I have no problem with Caglin as my hunt leader, Race tried to assure them. I recognise her skill. I guess we'll see then, Agnart responded. Caglin nodded. She looked about the rest of her hunting party as if making one final quick check, and then she launched herself into the air. Race waited, watching as the other 3 followed. Gaggara was truly very graceful as her body seemed to slice its way through the air. Airborne, she was a thing of beauty. She was made for the air. Could it be true? Was she really pregnant with his child? How could he be about to become a father when he was only 7 years old himself? What would his own father say? And what about his sister? And just how long was the gestation period for a harpy anyway? She'll be all right, Agnart said. She had come over and was standing next to him. I know you haven't known her long, but Kathleen is a very experienced huntress. She'll make sure your girl is safe. Reyes nodded. He kept his eyes on the fast disappearing hunting party, and especially on the figure of Gaggara as they headed generally towards the east. My offer still stands, Agnart told him. She had added a slight seductive edge to her voice. We can keep each other company until she gets back. I appreciate your offer, Reyes told her. Agnart was very pretty. She might be nearly twice his age, but she was still quite young, and Reyes had been so starved of female harpy company for most of his life that he still seemed to find any harpy girl a treat for his eyes. I really do. At least Agnart wasn't coming on strong the way Tifneg had, but if anything, that made it harder to refuse her. I'm sure most other males would jump at the chance of such an offer. No other males around to ask, Agnart replied. Reyes paused. Gaggara really wouldn't mind. She might even be overjoyed, especially if Agnart did become his second female. Reyes stopped that line of thought. Gaggara might not see it as betrayal, but he would. He would be betraying everything that he valued most. I'm sorry, I really do have a small errand to run this morning, and I'd like to get back before Gaggara returns. Okay, Agnart replied. She sounded quite a bit friendlier than she had last time he had told her no. Maybe once you've run your errand, we'll have a little bit of time to ourselves before the others get back. Reyes turned his head to Agnart. He could just say no, but it would be easier to just not come back for 3 or 4 hours and give Kathleen and her huntresses plenty of time to return with their kill. I'd better get going. Hurry back, Agnart told him. There were 9 markets in the city. 5 of them were quite small. Originally they had started as nothing more than a square or green on which executions had been carried out from time to time. Eventually shops had sprung up around the outside of the green in order to cater for those who had come to watch the executions. Nowadays, during the hours of daylight, the square or green would be home to many merchants selling their wares from the back of a barrow, or sometimes something more permanent such as a wooden stall. A lot of these markets had offshoot roads that were also lined with a few shops. One such road was Tapster's Alley at the Eastern Market, although the inn there was the only building on that road. 3 other markets had grown to be quite a bit larger over the years. These were all found in the more northern half of the city, where the goods coming in from the nearest neighbouring city could supply them quite easily. Then there was the central market. If anything, it was a little bit to the north of the centre of the city, and was connected directly to the northern market by means of a long and narrow alleyway. It also differed from the other markets in that this was originally designed as a market, rather than as a place of execution. Although by a strange reverse of fate, the central market was now the only place that still actually held regular executions. For most of it, the central market was just one very long, wide street. It was wide enough to have had buildings running along the centre, although what it actually had was nothing more than a few decorative trees and small boxes of flowers fixed into place to help brighten the market. The street was at least a mile long, and was lined with shops on both sides for its entire length. As with other markets, there were a large number of connecting roads and alleys, and each one was lined with shops for at least part of its length. At the southern end of this long street was a very large market green. Shops surrounded it as in the cases of other markets. But other than a few barrows scattered about the very edge of the green where refreshments could be bought, there were no stalls cluttering up the grass. This was a place where elves could take their children to play in the shadow of the huge stake that dominated the small area of burnt ground in the very middle of the green. The stake was surrounded by a simple guide rope, a warning to all that came here not to venture too close. Reyes landed next to the stake. Most days the remains of the previous victim would have been left on display for all to see. Today, the stake was empty. The stake itself had even been replaced in readiness for tomorrow's execution, and already a new heap of dried wood and dead leaves had been stacked at its base. Reyes stayed on the right side of the guide rope. It might be there to mark how close the crowds were allowed to get during the actual execution. Reyes, though, thought that perhaps the rope was there more to stop the locals running off with any of the dried wood in order to heat their own homes, especially now that winter wasn't all that far off. "Can I get you something to eat or drink, miss?" someone inquired. Reyes turned and saw an elderly-looking elf woman tending to one of the barrows. By the look of it, she wasn't doing much in the way of business, and she was looking right towards him, hope in her eyes. It was a fairly small barrow, with 2 large barrels sitting on top of it. There were also 6 pint-sized tankards hanging off of hooks around the outside of the barrow. "What do you have?" Reyes asked. It was amazing how many people seemed to mistake him for a female just because he was wearing a skirt. Few people, it seemed, I ever noticed or could devise his gender from his wings. "Milk mainly," the woman replied. "I have a little bit of cheese if you're hungry." Reyes considered the idea of buying some milk from the woman. He was a little thirsty after his flight, but the words of Jarvis came to mind. Never trust any food or drink given to you by an elf. "Thank you," Reyes said. "I think I'll pass." "I thought you might," she replied unhappily. "No one ever wants to buy from an old woman whose husband died in the defence of the city. I sometimes wonder what he was fighting for." "I'm sorry," Reyes told her, and there was genuine pity in his voice, "but elven food and I don't mix." "You think I'd poison you?" the old woman voiced angrily. "You accuse me of selling enchanted food? Bloody harpies, why don't you go back to the mountains where you come from? Go on, go home. Tell your mail we don't need you here. No one wants you here. This used to be a lovely city before you and your ilk started to settle here. Now you come along and treat me like a second-class citizen. I've been a resident of Goldspawn for nigh on 90 years, and you come here and accuse me of trying to poison you. I wouldn't get very far in business if I went round poisoning my customers, would I? Would I?" "Look," Reyes tried to placate the woman. "I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean it to sound the way it came out." Actually thinking about it, he thought he'd been quite diplomatic. "Go away. Get gone from here," the woman continued. "You're scaring away my customers, tupping harpy." Reyes was tempted to say, "What customers?" No one had actually been queuing up to buy the woman's milk before he arrived, and it didn't exactly look as if anyone was waiting for him to leave now. Reyes turned round and took a few steps from the barrow. He looked at the stake again. If what the Dragon Man Superior of the Inquisitors had said was right, then at about lunchtime tomorrow they were going to be burning a flourished spy at that very stake. That spy could well be his friend Jarvis. If it was, then he felt he ought to do something about it. Even if it wasn't Jarvis, he felt he probably ought to do something. Reyes noticed that a couple of male elven children, who had been playing some sort of game on the green, had stopped what they were doing shortly after he had landed, and were now staring at him as if they had never seen a harpy in their lives before. There was no sign of a supervising adult anywhere. "You see," Reyes overheard one of them saying to the other, "I told you, that woman would serve anyone." "Come on," said the other playfully, "let's sneak a look under her skirt." "Don't be silly," said the first. "Look at her claws. She'd probably kill you. What would you want to see that for, anyway?" Reyes rounded on the children. For a start, there were plenty of naked harpies in the city for you to ogle, if that's really what you're into. "Yeah," replied one of the children, "in Harpy Town, where it stinks." Reyes would have to agree that, located as it was between 2 streets lined with crows' cages, and next to a street that the harpies used as a lavatory, Harpy Town was hardly the most fragrant place in the city. "Secondly," Reyes continued, "if you looked up my skirt, you are likely to be in for quite a shock. I'm male." "Don't be silly," one of the children countered. "Everyone knows that males don't travel alone." Reyes decided it was best to ignore them. Instead, he turned his attention back to the stake. He didn't know what to do. Jarvis, if it was Jarvis, wouldn't be brought out to the stake until tomorrow, and until then, Reyes had no idea where he might find him. Tomorrow would be too late to act. If Reyes waited until tomorrow, then Jarvis, or whoever the victim was, would be brought out amidst a small army of soldiers. Reyes was good, but somehow he doubted he was that good, especially now that he'd lost his sword and only had 3 arrows to his name. Besides, Cadling's group wasn't down to hunt tomorrow. Tomorrow they would be cleaning the waste pile by the fire pits. It was nice to know that as a chargeman he could now avoid that duty, but even without him helping it wouldn't be a very long job. It would certainly be finished in plenty of time for Gaggara to accompany him to the execution. Reyes couldn't even begin to consider how he might pull off a rescue with Gaggara by his side, watching his every move. As Reyes contemplated what he could do next, one of the elven children approached him from behind and said, "They're getting ready to burn someone there tomorrow. It's going to be quite the show. Will you be back tomorrow?" "Are you really male?" asked the other doubtfully. "I really am male," Reyes admitted. He turned round to look at the children, and then he glanced around the rest of the green, trying to find some trace of a parent. "Would you happen to know where the prisoner is now?" "Sure," the first said. "He'll be held at the arena. That's where they hold all the prisoners. I thought everyone knew that." Thank you, Reyes told the boy. The arena. He should have guessed. It had the best security in the city. Even those who weren't chosen to fight in the arena started their captivity in one of the arena's cells. It also made sense for another reason. The arena was located just to the south of the central market, meaning that tomorrow's victim wasn't going to have to travel far to get to his appointment. Reyes took to the air immediately and flew south. The arena was quite a large structure, capable of holding and entertaining a crowd of more than 20,000 at any one time. The top of it was open to the elements, which meant that creatures that could fly, such as harpies, didn't even need to pass through the main entry doors in order to get in. The arena even had special perches located around the top edge of the structure, specially designed for use by harpies. It was probably just as well. The seats certainly weren't designed to accommodate either wings or tails. Reyes couldn't help thinking, though, that those perches were deliberately placed in such a way that those who used them were furthest from the actual action, leaving the best seats in the house for the elves. Reyes remembered Gaggara telling him how harpies got into the arena free. She had said it as if it was some sort of secret that the harpies had been putting the wool over the eyes of the arena organisers for years. In a way, Reyes found it amusing to think that those in charge of the arena clearly not only knew what the harpies were up to, but that they had made arrangements to make the harpies a little more comfortable. That reminded Reyes that he had been here once before, and he hadn't savoured the experience. Even though he and Gaggara had watched from one of those perches, he had still been close enough to see every blow and to hear every sound. The clang of metal against metal had been bad enough. The squelch of metal against flesh had been sickening. Reyes tried not to think too much about what sort of things happened at the arena. Maybe Jarvis would be better off getting burnt at the stake rather than wasting his turn to fight and die in the arena sand. It put it into some sort of context. Here he was, trying to find a way to rescue a single prisoner, when every day thousands were dying either in the arena or in the crows' cages. Sometimes it was amazing to think that there was anyone left in the city. Reyes landed by the main doors. There was a small crowd waiting to get in, but it wasn't all that large, as there was no champion bout being fought today. No spectacle of Skeeg the ogre pounding another opponent into jelly. According to the nearby posters, all that was scheduled for today was a series of newcomer bouts in the morning, and sometime this afternoon a pair of elves would be vying for their fourth victory. An elf was standing by the entrance, checking everyone passing through the door. He didn't seem to be taking money from anyone. By the look of it, everyone was allowed into the arena for free. Reyes assumed that the elf had to be checking people for weapons, though if that was the case, why did the harpies get away without such a search? The elf glanced up quickly at Reyes the second that he landed, but then he returned to what he was doing. Harpies' entrance up top, the elf commented. Thank you, Reyes replied. Actually, I was hoping to see one of the prisoners. Sure, the elf replied. Go on up top, you can see all the prisoners. Well, all the ones competing today, anyway. No, Reyes replied calmly. I want to talk to one of the prisoners. Is there any way I can get into the cells? The elf laughed. Nothing easier. Really? Reyes asked. He had thought it would be harder than that. Sure, the elf replied, grinning. Commit some sort of crime. You'll find yourself in the cells in no time. I see, Reyes replied. If the elf had been trying to be funny, Reyes wasn't very amused. What if I just wanted to visit one of the prisoners? Nothing doing, the elf replied. Prisoners do not get visits from either friends or relatives. Perhaps if your friend manages to survive 20 bouts in the arena, you'll get a chance to talk to him. Suddenly the elf took on a sterner tone. Other than that, be on your way. I have work to do. Reyes began to feel that this was getting him nowhere. Without another word, he took to the sky. All he could think of was that there had to be another door, one that had access into the prison section of the arena. Reyes flew a complete circuit of the arena, looking into every possible nook and cranny. Perhaps the door he was looking for would be well hidden somehow. All he found were the entrances. There were 3 of them, scattered roughly equal distance around the arena. In each case, a single elf was on watch as a small crowd of visitors to the arena passed through the door. No wonder the arena was considered to be such high security. There seemed to be no physical way in or out. Reyes flew up to the top of the arena and took one of the vacant perches there. The only thing that occurred to him was that since he knew the prisoners were being teleported into the arena by the magical eyes, then it would make some sort of sense that those who were sentenced to something other than fighting in the arena, as well as those few who were eventually released, were probably being teleported out again in some way. Teleport wasn't exactly an easy spell to cast. Reyes definitely couldn't cast it, and he didn't think Jenny could cast it, though he knew that Mangloss did have the spell. Reyes didn't know whether the eyes had originally been commissioned by the militia as a way to keep down crime, or by the owners of the arena to recruit more victims. Either way, knowing that they had been created by someone who was not only capable of teleporting others, but who was also able to endow objects with that power, was a scary thought. The idea that he might suddenly come face to face with a mage of such power, especially while trying to rescue Jorvis from the arena cell, scared Reyes more than just a little. On the other hand, Reyes doubted that such a mage would be hanging around the arena, unless he had come here specifically to be entertained. Mages with that sort of power weren't likely to be hanging around the arena, just on the off chance that someone tried to break in. From up here, at his perch near the top of the arena, Reyes could quite clearly see 4 of the 6 colour-coded doorways from which the combatants would emerge. Those doors had to lead down to the cells. For a moment, Reyes toyed with the idea of flying down into the centre of the arena and making his way through one of those doors. He decided against it almost immediately. It sounded to him more as if it was desperation talking than any decently thought-out plan. After all, how long would it take them to track him back to his barracks? Even if he took off his skirt and armband before acting, he doubted it would take them long to find him. Reyes sighed. He left his perch and flew back towards the central market. Maybe he should just give up. He didn't know what else he could do. Perhaps if his father had been close by, he would have been able to supply Reyes with some advice. But Reyes was only 7 and had far too little experience of such things. In a way, though, he could almost hear his father's voice in his head saying, "Let it go. Jorvis is a good man who knew the risk when he left us to spy on the owls. He would rather go to his death knowing that you were still out there alive and well, rather than have you join him at the stake." It was like a puzzle without an answer. Sometimes it was hard to admit that there was simply no reasonable solution. Reyes landed just beyond the edge of the green in the central market, and walked slowly over to the nearest shop. He felt a little bit like a coward, because he was running away from the problem. He began to browse the goods through the shop's window. He took his time. There was no hurry. It had only been about an hour since he had left the compound. Considering how hard it had been to hunt anything decent near to the city recently, he knew that Kathleen and her party were more than likely still out, and possibly flying further and further from the city every minute. Meanwhile, Agnar would be waiting for him to return and keep her company. Reyes was sure that he didn't want to return too soon. Maybe he'd visit Harpy Town. He needed to replenish his arrows, maybe even replace the 3 that he still had. Yes, once he had finished browsing here, that would probably be a good use of his time. He needed some pretty stones to barter with. He could get those here in the market, and maybe he'd even purchase a few extra as a gift for Gaggara.